Despite the odd moan and groan from his brothers, they are zombies after all, there were no more mishaps on the way into Tempelhof. As Helman made his way down the narrow streets towards the plague pits on the other side of town, he looked around him at the place he once called home. The last 50 years had not been kind to the once proud village of Tempelhof. Once the plague that had caused so much devastation had subsided, the population of Sylvania had been reduced to almost a third of its previous level. Whilst this in itself had been cataclysmic for the country, the bigger evil of the disease was the array of evil and undead creatures that the immeasurable number of dead citizens had attracted. While Sylvania had long been governed by a dynasty of vampires, the von Carsteins had largely let the peasant population get on with their lives without too much interference. The same could not be said for Sylvania's newest inhabitants. Reaching the northernmost edge of the village, Helman looked down the length of the valley. Helman summoned his familiar, a perky little bat called Susan. "Susan, I need to borrow your eyes. Fly as high as you can and look to the north." As Helman watched Susan ascend, he mentally reached out for the winds of magic. Once he had enough tendrils of power flowing about him, Helman closed his eyes and began the incantation of second sight. Helman finished the incantation and slowly opened his eyes. "I need to get you some glasses. Why couldn't my familiar have been an eagle or something like that?" thought Helman as he examined the blurry image before his eyes. Whilst Helman contemplated and cursed the poor vision of bats, Susan let out an inaudible scream. As she did, Helman was amazed to see all of Tempelhof and the surrounding areas flash into perfect clarity before him. "That's why you chose a bat," thought Susan. Helman closed his eyes and relinquished the spell. As he opened his eyes and looked to the north, a smile crept across his face. The raiding party was making a lot slower progress than he anticipated. They were still a good 3 or 4 days' ride away. Helman pushed on and headed for the plague pits. As he approached, Helman could not but grimace as he spied the hole that he had spent a night in all those years ago. He would start with that one. Helman ensured that he was within 18 inches of the pit before commencing the raise dead spell. Helman reached out for the winds of magic with his mind. He counted as he pulled each tendril of magic out from the winds. Once he reached the 9th tendril, he was ready to commence. Helman stopped himself just in time. He realized that he would need this to be a more powerful spell. As such, he reached back into the winds of magic and pulled out more tendrils of magic to ensure that he had the 14 required for the more powerful version of the spell. Now that he had the required power, Helman commenced the incantation. Once done, he stepped back and watched the moving pit of bodies before him. At once, several bony and decomposing hands grasped at the edge of the pit. Helman howled with glee as he watched the zombies pull themselves out of the pit. Slowly but surely, the cadavers of Tempelhof's dead clambered out of their resting place and ranked up behind Helman. Helman reckoned that there were about 40 or 50 zombies so far. As he continued to watch the figures rise from the pit, he noticed a distinct change in the makeup of his new troops. The bodies at the bottom of the pit had clearly been there for longer than those already behind Helman. The skin, entrails, and mushy bits on the bodies had all decomposed and fallen away. Skeletons! Helman had skeletons! Whilst not much better than zombies, Helman always found skeletons to be that bit quicker and better with a sword than their fresher cousins. Perhaps it was that they didn't have those annoying things like brains getting in the way, as they so often do. Once the last of the undead host emerged from the pit, Helman turned to examine his work. There must have been around 100 figures in all. This was a good start. Helman willed his army to remain where they were as he made his way to the north. There were another 4 pits nearby, along the road. Helman knew the limits of zombies and skeletons well. Whilst the raiding party did not appear particularly large, he knew that even 500 zombies may struggle against a force from the Empire, particularly if they brought either a wizard or one of their infernal machines. To the northeast lay the dire forest. Helman knew that he could summon a plethora of unholy creatures from within those haunted woods. To the northwest lay Castle Tempelhof. Helman knew that there were some powerful creatures and restless spirits residing within the walls of that unholy keep. The woods were a day's travel away, and the castle was about a day and a half's travel away. There was a day's travel between each place. Helman would also need time to make arrangements in Tempelhof before the battle. Helman contemplated which option was best. As he did so, he was reminded of a similar situation from his youth. May had been a long and difficult month for the Ghorst family. Helman's grandmother had not long died, and his family had been in mourning for the past few weeks. Despite only being 10 years old, Helman could see that the family's food supplies were running low, and that if things didn't pick up soon, they would be in trouble. In addition to the Ghorst family's troubles, Tempelhof had been terrorized by a monster that appeared to be stealing the pets of the villagers. Some spoke of a hulking great monster with giant claws that came in the night. These stories had even attracted the attention of the Guild of Witch Hunters, who had been travelling through Sylvania, but decided to set up camp in Castle Tempelhof until the end of the month and see if the stories had any merit. Helman had always been a sickly child, and so had not been allowed to help his family about the stables. His mother had not even taught him to ride. Helman decided that in order to help his family, he would venture into the village and see if he could get a little part-time job. There were some places that Helman would not like to work, and so he struck them off his list immediately. He could not imagine himself working in a funeral director's, as a grave digger, with a local doctor, or in a butcher's shop. Helman did, however, have 3 places in mind that he could ask for work. First, Helman headed to the local pharmacy, Dawn's Apothecary. As Helman entered, he looked at the array of jars and vials adorning the walls of the shop. Helman approached the manager, a friendly-looking man whose name badge read Tej. "Excuse me, I was wondering if you possibly have any vacancies for an assistant," asked the young Helman. "Sorry, little fella," said Tej. "That position's already filled, I'm afraid, by my son Daniel." Helman hadn't noticed the young assistant sat at the desk in the corner of the room. "Not to worry, thank you anyway, sir," said Helman before making to depart. As he turned to go, he watched Daniel sprinkle some glowing green powder in a glass pot which was labelled Jam Jar 34. Daniel sealed the vessel and placed it on the shelf next to Jam Jar 35. Helman left and made his way to the next potential employer. The Hobby Habit was a local arts and crafts store. Helman could easily see himself fitting in there. He entered the shop and saw a wonderful array of paints, different types of paper, little wooden models, and an array of dice. In the corner sat a young dwarf who appeared to be painting one of the little wooden models. Helman approached the counter and rang the bell for assistance. From out the back of the shop came a friendly-looking man who instantly took Helman by the hand and introduced himself. "I'm Joshua Duran, sometimes known by my handle of Joshua Duran. How can I help you?" asked Joshua enthusiastically. "I was wondering if you have any jobs going," asked Helman. "Not here, I'm afraid," said Joshua. "I'm an independent model and hobby shop that rewards my customers, and so, as profit isn't my main driving force, I can't really afford to take anyone on at the minute. Let's see if the dwarf over there knows of anyone hiring." "Dwarf?" hollered the shopkeeper to no avail. "Little fella over there in the corner," he cried, to still no response. "Mini-man painting!" shouted Joshua. The dwarf looked up with a start before running from the shop with a look of shock on his face. "I guess not, then," said Joshua before getting back to work. Although not strong, Helman was quite adept with a brush. As such, he decided to try the Viking runesmith to see if they had any positions available. The blacksmith, Fimbus, had proclaimed himself the alternative artist of Tempelhof, as he had crafted a beautiful weapon to vanquish the creature that had been terrorizing the streets of the village. "No doubt you've come to see the monster basher," proclaimed Fimbus as Helman entered. "I'm afraid you're too late, laddie. I've already sold the axe to those witch hunters up in the castle. They had been giving out these leaflets around town saying that if anyone was able to help in the apprehension of the monster before the end of the month, they may pay handsome rewards. Anyway, sorry to disappoint you, laddie. Send my best to your father." And with that, Helman was whisked out of the door. As Helman sat, feeling in a bit of a daze, he looked north. There it was! The creature! Helman saw it approach a toddler who was sitting stroking a cat. The creature snuck up behind him and threw its sack over the child and its pet before sitting down. The child's mother, realizing that her son had been grabbed, let out a scream for help. "My Norman! That beast has taken my Norman! Please, someone go and get him back!" Hearing the scream, the creature broke out into a terrified run to the north. Helman chased after the creature. He reached a fork in the road. The right fork led into the wood, where he could see the creature now running. If he followed it, he might be able to save the young lad. The other road led up to the Castle Tempelhof, where he knew the witch hunters waited. They would have the skills to destroy the creature, and he could claim the reward and help his family. Helman looked between the 2 paths before running after the creature. Helman followed the monster's tracks for about half a day before he reached the edge of the forest. Again, Helman was faced with a fork in the road. Helman knew from tales of the forest that the right-hand fork led to a clearing known as the Animal Graveyard. Many of the creatures of the forest made their way to this clearing when they knew their time on this planet was at an end. Helman was unsure where the other path led, but there were no signs of the creature's tracks anywhere to be seen. Helman shook his fist at the sky in anger. When he did so, he noticed an owl perched in the branches of the tree between the two paths. As a last hope, Helman cried, "Oh, wise owl, which way did the creatures go?" The owl hooted and looked down the road to the left. Helman was superstitious, and so decided to follow the left-hand path. No more than an hour's walk down the path into the woods, Helman spotted the creature sat on a rock. Helman approached the monster and gently said, "Excuse me, please don't be scared. I just want to talk." The creature jumped up and looked at the young Helman in a suspicious manner. "Please, could you give me the kid you've taken? I don't mind about the cats, but if you don't give the child back, then the witch hunters will find you and kill you." "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take the little one. I was just after his cat. I was going to let him go, but the lady frightened me, and I just ran. Here, take him back, and tell them all that I am sorry. I won't do it again," said the creature. "Thank you," said Helman, taking hold of young Norman. Helman could tell that the creature itself was an innocent. "Look, take my advice. Keep running deeper into the forest, and make yourself a home there. After today, the witch hunters will definitely be after you, and if you come into the village again, they will find you, and they'll kill you." The creature nodded forlornly and began its journey deeper into the forest, dragging its bag of cats behind it. Helman was given 100 warbucks by Norman's mother on his return to the town, and she promised that when little Norman was old enough to ride, she would make sure to send him to Helman's mother, Helga, for lessons. Helman decided that the forest had served him well back in his youth, and so hoped that it would do so again now. There may even be time to go to Castle Tempelhof after that, but he would have to determine that later. If he could reach the animal graveyard in the forest, he could raise reinforcements in the forms of wolves and bats. There might even be enough resources to raise himself a Terrorgeist. Helman knew that he would reach the graveyard in time, but it had been 40 years since he last stepped foot in the forest. Would the graveyard still be there, or would one of the other necromantic inhabitants of Sylvania have already beaten him to it? Helman commanded his undead host to remain on the northern border, and instilled with them enough magic to last 5 days. Helman leapt into his cart and whipped his four brothers into action. His journey into the forest had begun.